Shalom and welcome to the Middle East Report. In this programme today we have an interview with an Israel campaigner who has stood up to the haters, and this is his story. Warm welcome to the programme, and today's guest is all the way from North London, and his name is Jonathan Hoffman. Jonathan, warm welcome to the programme.
Thank you.
Jonathan, do you want to share a little bit about your background and growing up in this country as a practicing Jew, and also your father played an incredible role during World War II that probably helped to save thousands of British soldiers' lives?
Yes, well, I come from a strongly Zionist family, and it's interesting. I was born in 1952, and the first 30 years of my life I thought were the norm because they were relatively free of anti-Semitism. But in fact, looking back, they were the exception because anti-Semitism was there before and it's there again. So I've had to sort of reappraise the world and our place in the world. For 40 years, I was a professional economist, but now I really focus on countering anti-Semitism, promoting Israel, which is virtually a full-time job. It shouldn't be, but it is.
Yes, sadly so. But do you want to share the story you shared before we went on air about your father and your father's role during the Second World War? Because it's really quite a remarkable role they did.
Yeah, my dad was a linguist, and he had this amazing ability to be able to talk to anybody about anything in any language. So he would talk to the German prisoners of war about their families or about football or about the theatre, and then very subtly he would switch to talking about matters military, and the secrets would come flooding out. It was a great talent to be able to talk to anybody about anything, especially in any language virtually that you care to pick.
Excellent. And what was it about Israel advocacy, advocating Zionism? When did this all become real for you? Because I know that you went to Israel for the first time in 1970.
Well, I went to Israel in 1971 between school and university, and loved it. Was tempted to stay, except I had a place at Oxford to come back to. And then when I was at Oxford, it was the Soviet Jewry days. If you remember, Jews wanted to emigrate from the Soviet Union and weren't allowed to. And the big campaign then was for Soviet Jewry. And there was a group called the 35s, which actually disrupted events of the Bolshoi Ballet, for example, when they came to London. And that was frowned on by the mainstream Jewish community. But they were the first time I'd seen that kind of advocacy happening, and really it went on from there. I mean, my first big campaign was against an organisation called Jews for Jesus, and in fact, Jews for Jesus is a cult. They suck people in, and they had big placards in Jewish areas, and the strapline of the placards was "Think for yourself," and it was a row of actors dressed as Hasidim, religious Jews, with the background of something that looked like the Western Wall. And the only one of the actors, it was basically black and white, the placard, but the only coloured bit was the one actor who was smiling, and he was saying, "Think for yourself." And the theme, the subtext clearly was if you thought for yourself, then you would convert from being Jewish to being Christian. We had a long campaign with the Advertising Standards Authority against that, which we actually lost, but I learned a lot about that. And the campaigns really started from there and continue.
And really, if we look back, I suppose it's been really since the start of the Second Intifada back in 2000, where we've seen that rise of Jew hatred around the world. We've seen a rise of Israel being vilified in the media and in politics all throughout the Western world. And that seems to be the start of the modern rise of Jew hatred that we're seeing in the world today. And this is when Israel was, accused of being a pariah nation, having to defend herself from horrendous, almost daily terror attacks, whether they were bus bombings, whether they were bombings at coffee shops in Jerusalem and all over Israel. I mean, that was a very, very frightening time to be in Israel. But that seems to be where this new form of modern anti-Semitism started from. And why is that the case, do you think?
Well, it really started, there was a United Nations motion in 1973, Zionism equals racism. And there was a very good book by a man called Robin Shepherd called, I think it's called The State We're In. And he really, he traced it back to the left. The problem has been that the left, given the collapse of communism, the left is now without a cause. And they tried to radicalize the proletariat in the first world through the trade unions. It didn't work. So they picked on the proletariat of the third world, and they picked on the Palestine Liberation Organization as the proletariat of the third world. And if you think about Israel, it represents many things that the hard left doesn't like. Number one, it's a proudly nationalist state, and nationalism is anathema to the hard left. Number two, it's a state that perforce relies on the military, and military is anathema to the hard left. The third is that it's a state founded on religion. It's the character of Israel is founded on Judaism, and religion is anathema to the left. So there are these three anathemas which Israel represents, and the left was left without a cause after communism collapsed, because it no longer had an economic cause, and they needed a glue to unite themselves, and the glue that they fixed on is Israel. Also, Israel is an ally of the United States, and the United States is the big Satan, so Israel is the little Satan. So the cause du jour of the left now is Israel, and you just have to look at the relations between Corbyn and the Palestine Solidarity Campaign. Corbyn remains a patron of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, and you only need to look at Twitter very briefly to see the relations between the hard left, the Corbynite left, and the denigration of Israel. And by the time this programme goes out, we will have had the Pal Expo, which is this weekend. 37 of the speakers are either anti-Semites or viciously anti-Israel. And a number of them are associated with the Labour Party and the left as well. So that's really what we're fighting against. I mean, there will always be anti-Semitism, but the secret is to keep it at the extreme and not allow it to come into the mainstream. And when you have a leader of Her Majesty's opposition, who's blatantly anti-Semitic, and with whom the former Chief Rabbi Lord Sachs won't even sit down in a room together with him, then anti-Semitism come into the mainstream. And that is the challenge, to get anti-Semitism back to the extremes where it belongs.
Absolutely. Now, as of the recording of this programme, I'm recording this programme on Thursday, the 4th of July, you attended a very important funeral for a courageous and brave individual called Derek Bowden up in Norfolk, who I had the privilege of interviewing only last year, who not only was a British war hero, but he was also served and fought with distinction in Israel's War of Independence when Israel was attacked by 5 Arab armies. And there we see a picture there of his funeral with the Ambassador Mark Regev. Can you tell us who the other 2 individuals are?
Yes, the Israel Ambassador Mark Regev is in the middle. The gentleman on the left, as you look at the picture, is Rabbi Reuven Livingston, who is the Jewish chaplain to the armed forces, formerly the rabbi at Hampstead Garden Suburb Synagogue. And the gentleman on the right of the picture is the defense attaché at the Israel Embassy. And they're photographed in the cemetery in Diss in Norfolk, where Tom, Derek, Blake Bowden was buried, and where near the grave where one of his wives has been buried as well. And it was very moving as we started the funeral. There was a single plane flew past overhead, which had been Tom's plane. So we all looked up to the sky and applauded. It was a very moving time.
So why did you decide to go?
By complete chance, somebody who I know is a Jewish military historian, he sent me an email saying that this funeral was going to take place, and there was a piece about Tom Bowden in one of the local newspapers, and it had some of his biography. And this is an amazing man. He was somebody who in 1941, he was in a cavalry charge in Syria alongside Moshe Dayan, who became Israel's defense minister. And then after recovering in 1944, Tom Bowden parachuted into Arnhem. He had on him letters from an Israeli girlfriend. And because the Nazis discovered those letters on him, he was then put into Bergen-Belsen, into a concentration camp where he spent a month with the horrible task of disposing of the bodies in Bergen-Belsen. And he then returned to Palestine in 1948. He enlisted as a volunteer with Machal. Machal is the acronym for the volunteers in the Israeli War of Independence. And Bowden was assigned to the IDF 7th Brigade. And he founded the parachute school, the IDF's parachute school. He was asked to take it on. He had no equipment whatsoever. He managed to get parachutes, surplus parachutes from Britain, and he taught the original soldiers to parachute. Tom Bowden was a hero, and I was so pleased that you had done the interview with him 14 months before he died, because otherwise we wouldn't have any interview with him at all, and that is absolutely precious. And it was a very moving service, because it was with most famous men you have the funeral and then you have the memorial service later, but this was the two in one.
Oh, yeah.
So we had the celebration of his life at the same time as his funeral. So it was both a sad occasion because it was a funeral, but it was also a happy occasion because it was celebrating an amazing man's life, and it was quite unique. I take my hat off to the canon there, Reverend Canon Tony Billett, who spoke beautifully, and the service. I've got the order of service here, and the service was arranged so that there was a lot of sort of Old Testament in it. The hymns were popular hymns. We sang Jerusalem. We sang All Things Bright and Beautiful. And it was a very moving event in a St Andrew's church, in a Norman church in Norfolk, which was full.
Excellent.
And then we went to the burial ground, and there was the committal of the body at the burial ground. So
special thanks go to the Eastern Daily Observer, and for Stan McKay, we saw those photos of Derek Bowden's funeral. I'm going to show you now extracts of the interview that I did with Derek Bowden back in January of 2018. Derek, it's an absolute pleasure to have the opportunity to interview you today. Now, you were born on the 17th of December, 1921. Can you share something of your childhood with us?
Childhood, all very normal. You know, I had 6 brothers, and that was the main thing. That was a tremendous sort of brotherhood, and we were very close, actually. But they all, with the exception of one, they were all older than I was by steps of 2 years.
In your childhood, did you always want to be a soldier?
Oh yes, I've no doubt at all. But it was in those days, I should think any a modicum of sense would see that they were going to be a soldier anyway, whether they liked it or not. I mean, it just went on for years as the Hitler days. Preparation for war. We did everything we could, I think, to avoid war. In fact, we were almost branded a pacifist nation. But it was inevitable. It just you knew the moment you were born you were going to go into the army and you were going to be in the war.
This is the story of that glorious yet tragic operation which, in Mr. Churchill's words, will take a lasting place in our military annals and will, in succeeding generations, inspire our youth with the highest ideals of duty and of daring. Airborne troops arrive by glider to take part in the toughest job of the war. Losses are not light. Crashed and burning aircraft are but a fraction of the price to be paid. But the Red Devils of the skies do not count the cost. They proudly offer life itself in their bold attempt to strike the short route to Berlin. Back on the road from Eindhoven, men of the Second Army go forward towards Nijmegen and that vital bridge across the wider stream of the Rhine, whose capture intact was the most dazzling achievement of our airborne forces. That was the first objective of the operation, and it was triumphantly accomplished after a brilliant pitched battle. The second objective, the town of Grave, was also swiftly secured by the Guards Armored Division. Soon, our armor had passed through and was rolling northward.
Derek, can you share your experiences in Arnhem? Because the plan at Arnhem was that after D-Day that took place in June 1944, and this was the first time that the British and the Americans had a beachhead in occupied Nazi Europe, the plan was to shorten the war by landing British troops or parachuting British troops into Arnhem in the Netherlands. Can you share your experience in that battle that didn't turn out well for the British?
That was, again, if you remember the Crete episode when the Germans used their parachute division, and Hitler decided that the losses were so tremendous that he just would not pursue that arm at all anymore. They kept some, I think, but they didn't increase it at all. The general was von Student, and that was really the same thing with Arnhem, that the generals using the arm didn't understand it, how it could be used. It was really used, if an obstacle in the way, that was the idea that you would use the parachutists to jump over them. Well, it wasn't quite like that. And when they resisted, the Germans still had a lot of resistance in them. I mean, you would hear the bulletins, the news bulletins, and it sounded as if the war was over. But it wasn't over by a long chalk. When we really came up against resistance in Arnhem, and their generals, face it, were much better than ours. Well, I suppose they prepared for a war, that's the answer. But they were much better than ours. Student, Model, fantastic people who fought in Russia and all over the place. Ours were more of a country gentleman type. Our brigadier was a country gentleman, really. In civilian life, he didn't do very much except live in the country. Shan Hackett, he was in the Transjordan Frontier Force, and he came across to us to form the parachutists. But he got very badly shot up in Arnhem, and they managed to save his life. And it was a British doctor that did it, actually, because he was in hiding all the time.
Truly remarkable man and a great hero for Britain and also for Israel. What would you say that Derek Bowden's legacy is for Israel and the Jewish people? The fact is that Israel's ambassador, Mark Regev, decided to attend this must mean that he is a man of incredible courage and distinction that the ambassador decided to turn up for his funeral.
Well, Derek contributed a huge amount to the foundation of the state. He founded the parachute school. He fought for Israel, and without the volunteers of Machal, there wouldn't have been an Israel. So it really, Israel owes everything to people like him. But I think there's more of a sort of more emotional element insofar as he epitomizes what we call the righteous Gentile. Yad Vashem reserves the phrase righteous Gentile for people who save lives. So officially he's not on the list of Yad Vashem's righteous Gentiles, but he certainly is somebody, a non-Jew, a Christian to whom the Jews and Israel owe an enormous debt to him and people like him. And we never forget the people who help us, as he has done. And we will never forget Tom and the others who came and fought for Israel in the war of 1940. And there were a lot of them. There was something like 5,000 volunteers from 59 countries in Machal. Not all of them Jewish. And we salute their memory and we salute them.
Excellent. So let's have a look at this final extract of my interview with Derek Bowden, talking about his experience of helping to form Israel's first parachute regiment.
At our first 12 sergeants on a course to learn how to instruct, and in a small arms course. And then they came back and we put them on a parachute course. And we ended up with a wings ceremony where Ben Gurion came and handed out the wings, the parachute wings, which they were all very proud of. And they were all fairly well-trained parachutists. Most of them had, by the time they got their wings, had 100 jumps. And we were very, very intensive course. And I sometimes used to do 2 or 3 jumps before breakfast in the morning. Just get up and just take them one and a half. Luckily enough, the aeroplanes were very near to the dropping zone. You literally speaking, you just took off and jumped, and you could almost walk back to the aeroplane. A lot of dune country, sand dune country near Gadara. That's where we used to jump.
Derek, you've been honoured with this award called the Machal Award for your bravery and courage fighting as a volunteer in Israel's War of Independence. What does this mean to you to be honoured by the Israeli government and by the Israeli Defence Force?
Really, frankly, you'll come to it, I hope. But when you're of great age, as I am, you look back and you tend to think, well, what have you achieved? What have you done in all this time? I believe that the only reason I was probably put on the earth was to go and serve in Israel, to help recreate that ancient nation. I thought that all the time. Nobody ever doubted that, I don't think, that it was a prime objective. And I think that's the only real reason one has been given this long term of time. But it won't be very long before 100 years has been achieved. And I remember someone said to me when I left the army, they said, this war gone for 50 years. Well, it's been going on for longer than that. And it's still going on. But we made mistakes, of course, like many. We should never have allowed Gaza to go back. And that was silly. I mean, we shouldn't allow that to go back. I know it meant casualties, but war means casualties, I'm afraid. You can't do anything about it. We should have kept Gaza, and we should also, by now, have a division of troops. And it would terrify Egypt, But Egypt, of course, now has made peace, so there's no need.
What does Israel mean to you? Because we know that when you joined as a volunteer, the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, back in 1948, when you helped Israel's War of Independence, Israel today is a military and economic superpower in the Middle East. It has one of the best armies in the world. What does Israel mean to you?
Well, I suppose you can say, so I live here, so it's a second home, isn't it? I don't travel now, but it's most important. And a feeling in a way that one had something to do with it. Through immense difficulties, because of course the difficulty of me arose from the fact we hadn't got the equipment. But I think it's a wonderful thing to have happened. Here we are. We all have a written, well, the Christian nation anyway has a written history, the Bible, of an ancient nation, and it's come back into being. I believe it was God's will. That she should. Why use indirect methods? I'm not quite sure. Because you think it was all powerful, you just say, right, it's going to happen, and it would happen. But things are not done like that.
Derek, I just want to thank you for this wonderful opportunity, to having the opportunity to interview you today. A real hero, and thank you for what you've done in saving this nation during World War II, but also playing your part in defending the one and only Jewish nation during Israel's War of Independence. And now when I see an Israeli paratrooper, I'll think of you, Derek. That's the legacy left behind. Thank you. Absolutely amazing man, Derek, and a wonderful life, and thank you for what he did in not only fighting for Britain against the Nazis, but also coming to Israel's rescue during Israel's War of Independence and fighting, risking his life for the new fledgling state of Israel. Incredible legacy. But got to move on. Now, you've been involved in Israel advocacy, campaigning, attending very, very hostile anti-Israel meetings for must be over a decade now, Jonathan. So why do you choose to put yourself in the firing line and go along and attend some of these meetings?
You say, why do I choose to do it? I would put it differently. How could I choose not to do it? How can we as Jews expect non-Jews to stand up for us if we don't stand up for ourselves? So my question is, how could I not do it?
Yeah, but you're the exception, aren't you? I mean, there's not many Jewish people that are willing to go up to a very, very pro-Palestinian meeting where it's chance that from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, with chance of genocide, a chance of shouting out murderers against the Jewish people and against Israel, and horrible places to be. I mean, I've attended a few of them, so I know what they're like. They're not easy.
There aren't people who will do it, and there are practical reasons why not. In many walks of life, to stand up for Israel is career suicide, for example. In the humanities, in universities, it's career suicide. Not so much in the sciences, but certainly in the humanities, it's career suicide. In the arts and in culture, there are very few people who stand up for Israel. One is Maureen Lipman, who's fantastic. But there are many others who won't dare to do it. And, you know, it can be quite stressful. There was a piece recently in the Jewish Chronicle about the mental stress which the advocates face. And it is genuine. We're coming to, when this program goes out, we would have already had Pal Expo. It's, as we do the program, it's next weekend, but 2 years ago there was a Jewish chap who was at Pal Expo who later committed suicide. And one of the reasons he committed suicide was that he'd been thrown out of this Pal Expo for no other reason that he had a yarmulke on his head. And it is stressful, and you can't do it if you have other stresses in your life. We all have to take a break at times. So it's not easy, but I see it as a really important job. I mean, if you can't deal with a problem unless you know the problem exists. And the only way we can know the problem exists is if we have people who attend these meetings. Otherwise, we would never know it's happening.
And also, tell us about the Puma trial, in which you were brought to court by the Crown Prosecution Service and charged with a breach of public order at an anti-Israel demonstration outside the Puma's flagship store because of their sponsorship of the Israeli national football team.
So there's a group called In Minds, who are viciously anti-Israel and across the line into anti-Semitism a lot of the time. And on October the 8th last year, they picketed the Puma sports goods store in Carnaby Street in London because Puma sponsors the Israel football team. And there were things like the placards accused Israel of killing a Palestinian children every 6 hours, for example, caging a Palestinian child every 12 hours. It was a horrible demonstration. And a couple of us went, and there was a woman called Sandra Watfer who gave a speech which was also full of anti-Semitism. We simply tried to drown out the speech by shouting at her, and we shouted terrorist supporters off our street. And she is a terrorist supporter. She has spoken at the Al-Quds annual march, which is the horrible anti-Israel march in London, and has voiced support for Hezbollah, for the terrorist organisation. And simply for shouting at anti-Semites, we were prosecuted. And it was a disgrace. We were prosecuted on the basis of lies. I was accused of hitting her on the shoulder, which I never did. I was accused of calling her a bitch, which I never did. It was a prosecution on the basis of lies. And we ended up with public order offences. I had a Section 5 public order offence, which is the least serious one. But one of the appalling things about the prosecution was that we were accused of racial and religious offence as well. So in other words, the accusation was that we were not there simply to combat anti-Semitism. We were there because this woman, I assume, is a Muslim, and we were accused of Islamophobia. So we were, if we had been convicted of the assault, it would have been an enhanced penalty because of racial and religious aggravation. And that is just absolutely appalling. And I never believed that the Metropolitan Police had been infiltrated by Islamists, but, you know, I have my doubts now. And quite honestly, if you can't trust the justice system, what's the point? So I've lost faith. As far as Israel advocates go, I've lost faith in the justice system. And that's not the only thing. I mean, the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, has signed up to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. Well, it's no good signing up to definitions unless you implement them. And here we had a judge who showed no recognition whatsoever of the anti-Semitism we were facing. And there have been other cases as well. There was the case of Nazim Ali, who led the Al-Quds demonstration 2 years ago, who accused Zionists of being responsible for the Grenfell Tower fire. And he hasn't been prosecuted. Why? Because it was seen as a political statement. It wasn't seen as an anti-Jewish statement, because Zionism and Judaism, in the eyes of the Crown Prosecution Service, are different, which is ridiculous. I mean, most Jews are Zionists. Israel is the only Jewish state. So, of course, Judaism and Zionism are one and the same thing.
So is this designed to actually set an example to shut others down like yourself, Jonathan, from really countering the Palestinian narrative and countering the narrative of lies that are put out, so claiming that Israel is an apartheid state and that Israel murders so many Palestinian children every few hours, etc., murderers and what have you, that we often see at these hideous anti-Israel protests?
I think it is a statement from the judiciary that anti-Semites have free rein in the streets. You cannot do other than combat them from a distance. You cannot explicitly accuse them of anti-Semitism. Advocates for Israel are now being seen as the perpetrators and not the victims, and that is an absurd state of affairs. It's absurd that Nazim Ali hasn't been prosecuted for saying that Zionists were responsible for the Grenfell Tower fire. It's absurd that this anti-Semitic singer, Alison Chabloz, was not prosecuted. There had to be a private prosecution, which was eventually taken over by the Crown Prosecution Service. Jews are being shortchanged by the justice system in this country, Jews who stand up for Israel. And this is an impossible state of affairs. And when we think about where we should make our homes in the future, with an eye to possibly Corbyn getting into power, the fact that we cannot trust the judiciary and the courts and the police is a major factor there. It certainly is for me.
So let's have a look now at a little bit of an extract of what took place outside Puma store in Carnaby Street in London, organised by the pro-Palestinian supporters, which is really designed to attack Israel.
On Saturday, 6th of October 2018, Inmine's human rights group protested outside Puma's flagship store on Carnaby Street to demand Puma stop its sponsorship of Apartheid Israel Football Association, which includes football clubs based in illegal Israeli settlements and plays its football games on stolen Palestinian land in the West Bank. The protest was in solidarity with over 215 Palestinian sports clubs, which, on the 10th of September 2018, called on the world's third largest sportswear manufacturer, Puma, to respect Palestinian human rights and cut ties with the Israel Football Association. Inmine's chair, Abbas Ali, said, "In March this year, we protested outside Adidas' flagship store in London in solidarity with 130 Palestinian sports clubs who had requested Adidas to stop supporting apartheid war crimes. After sustaining much brand damage, Adidas stopped. Rather than learn from that experience, Puma has instead signed a 4-year contract to lend its brand to cover up and whitewash the very same war crimes which the illegal settlements constitute under international law. Illegal settlements built on stolen Palestinian land are normalized and legitimized by Puma through its sponsorship. This time, 215 Palestinian sports clubs have asked Puma to respect their human rights. So far, Puma has just ignored them. Sports is about fair play. Puma, through its apartheid sponsorship, is promoting racism. We are here to tell Puma that there is a price associated with standing with apartheid. Their complicity in Israeli war crimes will cost their brand dearly. We are here to ask Londoners to help Puma make the right decision by boycotting their products until they respect Palestinian human rights.
One democracy in the Middle East! There's only 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 one democracy! Off our streets! Terrorist supporters! Off our streets! Terrorist supporters! Off our streets! You kick terrorist supporters! Off our streets! Terrorist supporters!
Don't do that yet! Don't do that yet! Don't do that yet!
Shut your mouth!
You shut up!
off our streets!
Get off!
Terrorist streets! Terrorist supporters off our streets!
We are here today outside
Terrorist supporters
Puma's
off our
flagship
streets!
store in
Terrorist
Carnaby
supporters
Street
off our streets!
to demand Puma respect Palestinian human rights and stop its sponsorship of apartheid Israel
Off our streets!
Football
Terrorist supporters
Association.
off our streets! Terrorist supporters off our streets!
The Apartheid Israel Federation Football Association.
Off our streets!
Stop butchering! Stop butchering!
Terrorist supporters off our streets! Terrorist supporters!
The Apartheid Israel Football Association includes football clubs based in illegal Israeli settlements and plays its football games on stolen Palestinian land in the West Bank. Land from which Palestinian children and their families are pushed out. Land on which Palestinian homes are demolished. Land from which Palestinians are ethnically cleansed. Shame on Puma!
Terrorist supporters off our streets! Terrorist supporters off
The United Nations Human Rights Council this year, in March 2018, has reaffirmed that the establishment and expansion of settlements in the occupied Palestinian.
And the big irony is that most of those that play for the national team in Israel are Israeli Arabs. So I don't know where the apartheid is there. Jonathan, do you want to explain a little bit more in terms of the context of the video that we saw? I mean, I've seen demonstrations before, and usually what the police do is separate the Palestinian side with the Israel side. So if you can share with us what went on, the context of what happened.
Yeah, there was one policeman who showed up and then walked away. So although the police knew the demonstration was happening, they didn't separate us. And they gave out their leaflets which accused Israel of apartheid and killing children and illegal occupation of land, and we gave out our leaflets as well. But the main thing was we had this speech from this woman who talked about Israel committing war crimes, who talked about the Apartheid Israel Football Association, who talked about the Israel Football Association being complicit in apartheid, talked about Puma whitewashing Israel's human rights abuses, the lies that said Palestinian players are routinely attacked, imprisoned and killed, and shouting, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, which is a code word for one state, the end of the Jewish state. So this was a vile anti-Semitic event in London, and it's not the only one by far. And unfortunately, the police allow it. Anti-Semitism is not illegal. It is an offence if somebody assaults you for anti-Semitic reasons, then it's an aggravated offence. But anti-Semitism itself is not illegal. So we have these people in the West End, in a busy street, giving out leaflets which demonise Israel, which malign Israel, which malign the only Jewish state in the world. What are we supposed to do? We're supposed to stand by and watch and nothing happens? No, we don't. We go and we oppose them. So that's the context. Yeah.
And when the trial took place, why were you told to plead guilty to public order? I
don't know how much I can go into this on air, but the charges of assault were trumped up. They were based on lies. And it was intimated to us that if we pleaded guilty to the public order offences, then the assault charges would be dropped, which they were. And given the alternative would have been to go through with a trial and plead not guilty to both the assault and the public order charge and go to, my understanding was that we probably would have been convicted by this particular judge, and then we would have gone on to an appeal but you know, these things cost money. And I mean, if anybody's interested, we do have a defence fund. We've already raised £4,500, but that only goes part way to the fund. If you Google Crowd Justice, that's the name of the crowdfunding site. So all one word, Crowd Justice space Hoffman, Hoffman, you'll find our defence fund site. And if anybody wants to contribute, we'd be really grateful.
And how much has this had an impact on yourself and also your family as well, would you say?
It's not really had an impact on me, except that they put an exclusion order on me. So I'm not allowed to go within 10 metres of 3 named people. Sandra Watford, the woman called Vienna Lestat, who also goes by the name of Katja Ankerstrom, and a guy called Emmet Haverty-Stack, the 3 people in the video. I can't go within 10 metres of them, and if I do, I risk going to prison. So if I do demonstrations, I have to wear a body cam, because I'm sure that, you know, even if they're more than 10 metres away, if they see me, they'll approach me and then claim that I was within 10 metres of them. So I have to be careful now.
Now, when we see these demonstrations, having experienced them myself, they're pretty violent, and particularly one that stands out for me is when the Shalom Festival in the Edinburgh Fringe, for example, and the first year it was on, we had to go down a kind of corridor of hate, I would describe it, saying you've got blood on your hands, Palestinian blood on your hands for the tickets. The chanting was vile, constantly chanting that Palestine will be free from the river to the sea, which is an incitement to genocide. The general hostility was very nasty. And yet all of this seems to be in breach of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition on anti-Semitism, where if you refer to Israel as a racist state, if you say that Israel has no right to exist, you're in breach of these new guidelines to combat anti-Semitism. So why is the police and why is the government doing nothing in practice and not arresting some of the perpetrators who are actually calling for genocide on our streets?
The problem is, Simon, that although the IHRA definition has been widely accepted, it's still not a crime to say that Jews don't deserve self-determination, to compare the Israeli IDF with Nazis, is not criminal. Only if it's combined with other things should it be criminal. But those people in Scotland, I mean, Scotland law is different from English law, but I would argue that if anybody says to a group of Jewish people that you know, Israel is deliberately killing children, or that from the river to the sea there should be the shorthand for genocide, I would argue that is a public order offence, and those people should be prosecuted. We're being shortchanged by the police, by the Crown Prosecution Service, by the judiciary, and that has to change. And how we get it to change, I don't know, by protesting more, by being more vocal, by being louder, by doing all the things that we have been doing. We have to achieve change. We have to stand up for ourselves. And part of the problem is during the Holocaust took away 2/3 of Europe's Jewish population. And my parents' generation was recovering from that, was recovering in terms of resettlement in some cases, was recovering in terms of earning a living, bringing up a family. And the Jewish population of Europe is not even back to what it was before the Holocaust. So, you know, fighting anti-Semitism, unfortunately, in the Jewish community has taken a back seat for understandable reasons. But we have to have it up front now. There have to be more people involved in campaigning, more vociferous. You know, we mustn't stand for this kind of anti-Semitism anymore. And zero tolerance means exactly that. It means zero tolerance.
And Jonathan, what are your fears if the current level of Jew hatred continues, if these protests get worse? I mean, essentially, you mentioned Al-Quds Day, which is an event that's sponsored by the Iranian regime, where you actually have clerics from Iran who actually broadcast on the demonstrations, calling for the destruction of the State of Israel. How is all this possible, and how is this being allowed to happen in our country, and what are the consequences if our government and the police fail to act on this?
Well, there is some progress. For example, Hezbollah flags are no longer allowed at the Al-Quds Day, and that was respected. And indeed, the numbers on the march were down this year and have been down in successive years. So, we're not without some successes. And the Labour Party has been referred to the Equality and Human Rights Commission, which is another big step. So, we are making progress. But the example that I always cite is the universities. There are a number of universities which effectively are no-go universities for Jewish students. SOAS is one. Manchester is another. LSE is becoming so. I can reel off the list. We don't have proof because students do not have to register their religion when they go to university. So we can't evidence it, but we know from anecdotes that there are several universities that most Jewish children won't go to. Now that is appalling. You have to you choose a university. You should choose university according to the quality of the course, the quality of the teaching, the sports facilities, and so on. You should not be choosing a university by reference to the amount of anti-Semitism you will encounter there. That is an absolute disgrace. And how we can put up with that as a supposedly civilized country, that young Jewish people should have to choose their university according to the amount of hatred they will meet there, is an absolute disgrace. And, why is there only one university that has adopted the IHRA definition, and that's King's London? I think that's the only one. There might be another one. Why is SOAS refusing to adopt the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism? Why are hate figures still allowed to speak at meetings of Islamic societies in universities? That should not be allowed.
Yeah. And Jonathan, what role can our viewers play, who have a tremendous love for Israel and the Jewish people, to make their stand against the rise of Jew hatred in this country, and to make sure the truth of Israel is told?
Well, I think take the example from Tom Bowden. Be supportive. Come on our demonstrations against anti-Semitism if you are so minded. A lot of people aren't. There are ways you can do it in other ways. Get involved on social media, get involved on Twitter, write to newspapers, write to your MPs, take up the concerns of the Jewish community. We can't do it on our own. We're too small a community, and we really appreciate the help of our Christian friends, a number of them have been absolutely fantastic, and we thank them and we salute them.
I just want to thank you, Jonathan, for being my guest on the Middle East Report today. And, my heart goes out to you. You've definitely been through the mill. So hopefully what you've experienced, you're not going to stop doing what you're doing best, and that's campaigning and getting the truth about Israel known. So thank you for your bravery and your courage to stand up for Israel and your community. And I just want to thank you for watching today's programme. We started the programme paying tribute to an incredible war hero in Derek Bowden, who not only fought with distinction for the British during World War II against the Nazis, but also defended Israel when she needed defending during her War of Independence back in 1948, when Israel was invaded by 5 Arab armies. And of course, his expertise and his military know-how helped to achieve a victory for Israel, which meant the establishment or the re-establishment of the Jewish state of Israel. So let's continue our support for Israel and the Jewish people, and let's continue to speak up, because it's important that we don't allow the haters to win. So thank you for watching today's Middle East Report.